Hi everyone, I'm Stacey Taubman, founder and CEO of Rice Collaborative. Welcome to On the Rice TV, where we feature incredible women and their story. You are in for a real treat today as we feature a woman who is quite the trailblazer in her industry. Rhonda Hamm-Niebruegge is the director of St. Louis Lambert International Airport, where she manages 530 employees and a $190+ million budget. Rhonda worked for over 25 years in aviation management positions with American Airlines, TWA, and Ozark Airlines. She is a dedicated public servant and is on the board of directors for many organizations both locally and nationally. Hi Rhonda, welcome to our show.
Thank you, nice to be here.
Good to see you again. You were so kind and spoke on our panel at our conference this past June.
It was fun. I loved doing it. It was really interesting.
Yeah,
so.
Well, the people there were raving about you and remembering all the cool things you were saying, and it really inspired them. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, speaking of inspiring people, one of the things we do here at Rise is we have a nonprofit that connects high school girls to our members, and everything about what we do is to inspire young people to dream and achieve big. So I'd love to start back in the high school days. Some of us enjoyed our high school days, some of us did not. But either way, I think it's a fun place to start and think about, you know, what did you think you wanted to be and or what jobs were you doing back in the day?
Yeah. Well, I have to go way back, but I always had this dream that I was going to work for the CIA. From the time I was a young girl, that's what I was going to do.
Now, where did that come from? I think that's such an interesting thing. I had heard that about you, and I think that's so interesting.
I'm not sure. It's just what I always wanted to do. I thought it would be fascinating, one, to serve the country, but also to be able to play a prominent role as a female. So I grew up with all brothers, so always had that competitive side. So that's what I had sort of set my goal of doing long term. High school, I worked as a waitress at a Nickerson Farms restaurant.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, that's great.
Great skills. You learn a lot of different things about people and how to react to people and how to interact with people. So.
I say everyone needs to be a waitress at least once, or server at least once.
I would support that 100%.
Yeah, and so you did that, and then you went on to try to pursue this CIA dream, which is such a big dream at a young age. I think that's amazing. And so how would someone go about that? I know that's not where you ended up.
Right. Well, I thought what would give me the most benefit. So I went to Mizzou, so I studied actually German because I wanted to spend a great deal of time abroad if I could. My family heritage is Germany, so that was what was interesting to me. So I studied German.
Okay.
That was my major in college, all about German literature, the German language, and then I had a business on the side. So, I thought that would give me an edge. I did start interviewing for the CIA my senior year.
Really? How do you even if someone was, I know you didn't pursue this, but I am curious, when you were interested in it, how did you even find that interview, or what does that even look like?
The placements on campus, they always had all these various things, and there was always different recruitment, so I went to all of it.
Okay,
I went
smart.
And was able to sort of apply through for that. What I didn't realize back then was that it was a really, really long-term application process.
Right.
So
your senior year, you went and you ended up getting a job instead.
Right, I did. So it was close to graduation. I had started the interview process for a couple of months earlier. I found out then that it was going to be a long 12, 18, possibly 24 months at the time.
That was an unexpected curveball.
It was, and so I thought, well, I have to find something in the interim. So job fair on campus, Ozark Airlines was hiring.
Okay. Not too far from Mizzou.
Not too far, but a great local company, really believed in bringing people from the Midwest. So interviewed with them, got the job, and they were looking to put people in New York. They were opening LaGuardia Airport at the time.
Okay.
And we're looking for people from the Midwest to go to New York. And I'm like, New York? That sounds fun. I'll go.
Yeah, 21 or 22. Yeah, who doesn't want to live in New York?
That works for me. So I did. I accepted the job. And
prior to that, you had no strong desires for aviation or any background in aerospace and defense?
None whatsoever. But I thought, it'll be fun. And it was in New York, and I could continue to pursue. And so I took it kind of on a whim.
Yeah.
And when I went to New York and started at LaGuardia, absolutely fell in love from day one. I mean, it was just something about the airport, and at that time, LaGuardia wasn't the greatest airport in the world, but it was just fun. It was fun being there. It was fun hearing people's stories. It was challenging every day with the operation and a lot of the challenges of the congestion. So I found it fascinating.
I love the energy of an airport.
Yeah.
It's contagious, and it's great people watching. Yeah, and so you went and pursued this, and 25 years later,
here I am.
You're now running St. Louis Lambert Airport.
I did.
It's funny how how life takes us on these random paths, right? You never would have predicted back when you were in college or a teenager that you would be here today.
No, not at all. I had no desire, not what I predicted, which was a great life lesson, I think, for a lot of people. Is it's great to have dreams and passions, but sometimes you have to be flexible, and sometimes they never know where that road's going to take you.
Yeah. I often say you have to be clear in your why, but flexible in your how and what.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so after a couple of months of being there, the next round of interviews came up, and I even surprised myself. I said, I'm no longer interested. And I went home and I thought, did I just do that? Did I just turn down the next level?
Hold on, so let me make sure we understand this. So you went on, you began working at Ozarks, and while you were at Ozarks, the CIA second round of interviews came, and you're like, done.
Done.
Oh, fascinating, because you loved it that much.
I did. It was just, I thought, this is something I'd like to give it a try and see if I'm interested. And I had fun, and I thought, why not? I'm young, and let's go this route.
Take a chance.
And I never left the industry.
Well, obviously it was the right fit for you. Now, aviation and aerospace and defense, those tend to be very male-dominated. How have you navigated that through the years, or what advice would you give someone who is in a male-dominated field, whether it's aviation or something completely different?
I think two things. One, I had all brothers. So
yeah, you mentioned that, so that might have made an impact.
We were competitive, and they always convinced me I could do anything they could, and I did. And so I think that helped. My upbringing helped with that. Always had sort of that confidence level that I can do anything. It doesn't matter what sex I am.
Sure.
And so I took that approach when I took the jobs, and I moved up really quickly, both at Ozark and eventually at TWA. And so I thought, at the time, it never even really dawned on me that I couldn't do this path or I couldn't do this career. And I think I came at a time in the industry when they were looking for strong females. Yeah. And a lot was changing. And they were looking for female leaders that they thought could eventually run larger operations. And I fell into that path, and it worked out great for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do think it depends on what you've experienced, being around those brothers. And so, I have my degree in math, so I'm used to being the only woman in the room, and I think it's all what you make of it at times. Yeah.
I agree. And I don't think, I never, again, it never dawned on me that I couldn't because I was a female. If there was any doubts, it wasn't because I was a female. It was because, do I have the talent? Do I have the strength? Can I adapt to this changing environment? But it was never because I was a female.
Yeah. And so you were appointed to your current job in 2010.
10, that's correct.
Here we are in 2020, weird to say. 10 years later, you've been doing this job. It's impressive for you to be at that level for so long. How has that evolved and changed, to be in the same place for 10 years? What have you learned?
When I first took this job, it was a totally different challenge than what it is now.
Sure. And the airport was in a different place.
It was in a very different place. And the goal at the time of Mayor Slay was, we have to figure out how to make our airport better. How can we bring back traffic? How can we engage the community? So it was a totally different place and time. And
I'm going to pause you. That's hard to step into a big job where eyes are on you, and it may not have been in the best place at that time.
Right. Right, and I think that was it. And again, it was another challenge in my life, and I love the challenges. So I thought, okay, let's look at it as a challenge. Let's not look at it as this overwhelming hill that you have to climb. Let's take the challenge. So at the time, I knew a lot of the business community because I had been in this area for a while and had done a lot with different boards and organizations. So I tapped into that knowledge level of who are the leaders in the community and what is it they're looking for. So at that time, sort of helped get some really feel for what do you want this airport to be. So there were some pretty big obstacles to overcome, especially the financial side. Sure. And then just trying to build it back. So those were those first 2 or 3 years. It was really just about let's find a stable ground. Let's stop the bleeding and let's find a stable ground. Once we got to that point, then you could start building on that. And I think the last 4 or 5 years, that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to build on, okay, now that we've got at least an outlook and we've got some stability and we're starting to get recognition in the industry from the financial analysts and from other industries relative to aviation across the country. Now let's build on that. And it's never ending process. You're never done, obviously.
No, well, but it sounds like you're really great about having a vision, right? And being patient and being really intentional in some of your actions. And I think that can be hard sometimes.
It can be because you can't change overnight, especially the condition that we were in. You can't change it. And if you have that short-term vision only, or that let's get this done today, you're not going to survive in that role. So you do have to sort of have the patience and have sort of a longer-term view, which is hard for somebody with an operational background.
Oh, I'm sure. You know what? Something I think about that would be hard as your position too is what a public position it is. You know, you really, and you've had this public position for 10 years. And while I'm not on your scale, I have a community that I am, you know, in charge of. But it is challenging when you have a lot of different opinions and eyes on you.
It is.
And so, you know, and so I'm curious how you navigate that and how you're able to stay strong and feeling good when, you know, there's going to be days when people don't love everything you're doing, even if you're doing a fabulous job.
Right. Rule number one, I've always said, is don't take it personal, because it's not about you as an individual. It's about somebody's viewpoint of what they think the airport should or shouldn't be.
Sure.
And I think in this role, particularly for the last 10 years, if you had taken it as a personal, every time somebody didn't like something or questioned, you know, the path that we were taking, you wouldn't survive. You wouldn't survive.
No.
So I think, you know, and I've been able to do that. I look at the broader picture. I try to take a look and say, what are the stepstones that we've made? What progress have we made? And then you try and share that and educate without sounding like you're telling people.
Or being defensive.
Or being defensive.
Didn't you notice when
So that is a
not
balance.
taking it, not taking it personal is the first thing.
Right. And I think the second is you really do have to rely on your team to help say, you know, we've got a great team at the airport, people that have been there forever who know the airport in and out, and then those that are newer to the industry but have a great view of what's changing in the industry and what's moving forward. So I do think you have to take a lot of people's opinions into weight. At the end of the day, ultimately when you're at the top, you know, you sit there and you say, okay, it's my job to take the decisions to move forward. But I think including the people and making sure that they know what you're doing and you know what they think is right has been a big piece of it as well.
Yeah.
On the political front, that's a little harder.
Right.
I will tell you that's probably the piece I'm not the most astute at. Not a political person, never really wanted to be a political person.
But in some ways your job is you were appointed by a mayor.
That's correct. So so I knew that when I took it.
Yes.
So I think, you know, I try not to think about that
Sure.
sometimes. You try and say, what's the ultimate goal and what's the end here? And the end is just, let's get a better airport. Let's make this the regional asset it can be. So that's how I look at the job. I don't look at it as I'm a political appointee and what does the political world think I should or shouldn't do.
Sure.
I just try to look at the airport itself and really what's the best thing for the airport and for the region as a whole.
It sounds like you don't stay in your head too much.
Yeah, I know.
Which is something that some of us are still working on. Yeah. And speaking of that, you know, I think all of us have these amazing strengths that sometimes can also be a shadow. And I'm learning a lot about that as I'm growing our business, because some of the things that made me successful out of the gate are now things that can be a hindrance at times. So I'm curious, you know, what's a strength of yours that has served you well, but at times also been a shadow for you or a challenge?
Decisiveness, you know.
Yeah, say more about that.
You know, I've always been on the operational side, so when you live in an operation, especially like aviation, and you make decisions day to day, and when you're running large operations, you look at the consequences afterwards, not before.
Got it. So you're just like, here's what we're going to do.
Right. And most times, especially as you get more seasoned in the job, you trust yourself more on those, and so you make them without hesitation. You know, that can also be a hindrance, especially...
Well, sure, because you're human and not a robot or a computer.
So, you know, so you sit there and I make decisions very quickly. I don't mull things over. I don't sit for hours and think, what's people going to say? What are people going to do? What's the... I look at the facts and make a decision and move forward.
Yeah.
And if it's not the right decision, you learn from it, but you put it behind you and move on. And I think sometimes, you know, there were people who wish I wasn't so decisive.
Everything is a strength and a shadow. Everything is a strength and a shadow. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I mean, do you think that that's the secret to your success? Is that what made you so successful in this industry, or are there other things that you think are the reason that you are here today? 10 years later, it's such a big job.
You know, I think that's one of the top ones. I think the other piece is that I've always trusted myself to make good decisions, so that it comes across, I think, as confident. I don't know that inside you're always as confident sometimes as you appear.
Yes.
But I have been able, I know that I can make decisions. I'm not scared to make decisions, and I'm not scared to take the consequences if those are wrong. So I think that comes across with somebody that's got a level of confidence and somebody that's willing to stand out. And, you know, I think if you think about it, what is a good leader? And a good leader is someone who can take those decision-making roles and can not be afraid of what's the consequences if it's a wrong one, because I do think you learn over time. So.
And some of that learning, I think, comes from the people around you. I'm curious I know at the conference that you had talked about a mentor that made a big impact, and I know that our audience really enjoyed hearing about that, so I'd love for you to share about your mentor.
Yeah, and when I was growing up in this industry, mentors weren't like they are today, where you have these paths forward and you've got someone who meets with you regularly and you talks. But the gentleman who I think admired the most and who probably I learned the most from and always thought, geez, I wish someday I could manage with that skill and that talent, was a gentleman who I replaced ultimately as the vice president for North America. So for more than several years, he sort of followed my path. And the first call I got from him was after Ozark, when I was at TWA. And when you have a hub airport, those are big jobs. And so the people that typically get those jobs have been around for a long time and they've been groomed. And, and so he called me one day. I was working in a lesser management role, and he said, we have a big opening here. It was actually running the passenger services for the airport back in the TWA days. And he said, are you going to put in for that? And I said, should I?
So you hadn't thought about it up until that point. It had not hit your radar.
I was moving up and I was working toward but it came fairly quickly, and I had not thought of that. And he said, I can't make that decision, only you can. So I came home and I said, well, I'm going to put in for that. I think that was encouragement. I did. Ultimately, I got that job. Next one came around a couple years later, was running the region and taking on a broader role. And he said to me, and I was pregnant both times. And he said to me,
and he knew this.
And he knew this. Yes. I was quite pregnant both times. And he said to me, the Eastern region's open. Are you gonna put in for that job? And I said, And he said, your call. So I put in. I ultimately got that job. The next one that came back around was when the hub opened up for the vice president's role at the hub and running the hub here in St. Louis for TWA. And he called, and I said, oh, yes, I'm putting in,
By this point, you're like, I know where this is going.
I am definitely putting in. I want this job. I know I want it. And so he was always in the background, and he was always, I knew that if I had a question or if I wanted advice, I could call him. He would always check in periodically and say, yeah, that maybe wasn't the best decision. What do you think you could have done differently? But it was never an intimidating role. It was never, this is what you have to do or you should have done. It was just always sort of that, what did you think about that? And looking back, was that the right thing, the wrong thing? What could have been better? Or a great decision? How did that help you to think about the next step?
Yeah, he sounds so cutting edge. I mean, talking about these jobs before, it should never have made a difference whether you're pregnant or not. But back in the day, those kind of things did matter.
Right. They did matter.
And they shouldn't have.
Right.
But they did. So I find it really interesting that he was ahead of his time in some way.
And, ultimately, I came to rely so much on watching him and just how he interacted with people. And he was so down to earth, and the employees had so much respect for him, I think. When he called me into his office one day and said, I'm retiring next year. And I said, oh, wow. And he said, I've asked the board to consider you as my replacement. I was not expecting that.
Sure.
And, it was an officer's role, and it was running all the North American airports. And I thought, oh, my God, what an opportunity. And I said, yes, I'd love to. And he said, I knew you would,
You don't have to think about things anymore.
Right. And he said, that's the person that I saw 20 years ago. I saw that decisive young person who wanted to take leadership roles and who never doubted herself. And he said, I think you can do this. I think some things we're going to teach you. And I said, okay, what do I need to learn best? Yeah. But all these years, when I look back, I still think the way he handled himself, the way he handled people, and it wasn't always that glorious.
Sure, of course not. It's not
ups and downs. But even during the difficult times, I watched his actions. I watched the way he managed through, and I always thought, geez, if I could be that type of a leader, I think that's who I'd want to be.
Wow, that's so amazing that you had that.
Yeah, it was nice.
You've done this job for 10 years, and here we are entering a new decade. What fun things are to come at St. Louis Lambert Airport? What are you working on, or what are you thinking about?
Well, obviously last year was a big year. There were a lot of things going on, so those things are behind us now. So we're looking, I do think that the focus is now on the airport in terms of really being a regional asset, and how do we make it the best that we can be. Obviously, a European flight is a big ask from the community.
Yeah.
I think we're close. I think we can all put our heads together and find a way to make that happen. So that's one big step.
Sure.
I think the other things we have to really look at is the growth of Southwest and where they're at, and how crowded that terminal is, and other
I fly Southwest every week going from St. Louis to Denver.
Awesome. So I think we have a lot of things that I think we need to focus on, because we do have the stability back. We have, I think, a lot of good foundations that are solid now. So now you've got to that point. What are the next 5 years? And what do we, the community, what do the airlines want? What is it I think that the team at the airport feels we can do going forward? So I think there's a lot that can happen. I mean, I think our biggest push this year is going to try to really be to get the European flight back. And so we'll see if we're successful in that. It's always... there's a lot of competition out there, and there's a lot of things on the table, but that's a big one for this year that we're going to work on.
Yeah, and something I've noticed about you just from watching different interviews, you're really great about recognizing the awesome things you guys have done, but also really thinking about how can we constantly improve. I think so often people are just in one place or the other. It's either... for me, I'm always thinking about what's the next thing and how do we do it better. I don't do as good of a job as sitting and recognizing the things we have done. And I admire that you're able to do that. And I've heard some of the things that you guys have accomplished.
If you stop in this industry, you're going to be so far behind. You can't catch up.
That's true.
So I think, it is one of those that you can't stop because it's changing and it's evolving so much. And even airports, not just aviation in general, but airports. And what are the trends and what do people want? And those trends change. Years ago, people didn't want to maybe think about restaurants and shops. These days, that's a buzzword, okay? Local. People love local.
Yes.
2 decades ago, local didn't matter. So you have to constantly rethink what is that the world wants today, especially the millennials and the travel, and are the coffee shops. Whoever thought of coffee shops 20 years ago being a prime spot for people to gather and sit down. Today, everybody wants that flexibility. They want that sort of environment and convenience. So I think, I've been forced to say, you would like to, at some point, you'd like to say, I'm done. Wow, this is great. We've got here.
Yes.
But you can't in this industry.
And I think that really translates beyond aviation. I think so often companies reach a certain level of success and then they sit, right? And the world is ever evolving and changing. So I love to be able to hear that about what you're up to. Now, our last question, we always talk about, here at Rise, we live by the quote, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and how that really shapes your view of life and what you want to be and all those things. Now, I know we've talked a lot about your mentor and how he really made an impact, and it sounds like you may not be where you are without him. So, but I'm curious if there's someone else that's really made an impact, and how so.
Yeah, I would say my husband Steve. So we've been together 33 years this year. He always knew we're very different personalities. First of all, much quieter, much more reserved. I tend to be the more loud or outgoing one. But we've always had a mutual respect, and he knew when we got married that we both wanted a family. And I wanted a career, and he was never going to make me sacrifice that career. So I think, all through this 30 years of where I've been, and there were some very high pressure jobs and a lot of travel and a lot of time away, he was always there and supported it. And without jeopardizing his own career as well. And I think knowing how supportive he was, knowing that this would have probably not been his choice of me to be in a public career today that I'm in.
Because it does impact him as well.
Yes, it does, which sometimes he cringes on. But he's never said, don't do that, or no, or I wish you wouldn't. He's always said, that's your call. That's your career. And so I've learned so much respect, because I probably am not as generous sometimes.
I can relate.
So
it's hard to do.
It is hard to do. And I've appreciated so much his ability to know that he's probably thinking different sometimes, but doesn't.
What comes out of his mouth
is so much different.
Where I have no filter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, that's really impressive. And again, ahead of the times.
Yeah, I think
I think in today's day and age, you are seeing more and more husbands being equal partners, or sometimes even raising the children and the wife pursuing the career. But back 20, 30 years ago, you didn't see that as often.
No, and we have 3 children. Our oldest one's 32, and our youngest one's almost 26 next week. So it had been a while, and they were close together in age. So you know how it is with 3 toddlers and trying.
Oh, I don't know how you stayed sane.
It wasn't easy. I mean, I traveled, he traveled, and we managed to figure out schedules and patterns. So, but I look today and I think our kids are all normal. They're great kids, starting their own families, and so I think, and the kids have often said, we never saw you and Dad argue. You know, I mean, what? And I said, well, I think that's probably the nicest compliment you can give us.
Of course, yeah.
Because we typically, you know, we don't argue. We have opinions and we're
discussions.
Like, and discussions. That's
Sure.
exactly right. And I think that's morphed down to our children as well, which is a great thing to see, that that they realize you can have families, you can have careers, and you can be busy, but at the end of the day, you can be successful as well. And
I love that they picked up on that. It's funny what kids pick up on and you would never predict, and what a great thing for them to pick up on. Well, you are such an inspiration to so many women and myself, and it just means the world that you came on our show. So thank you for that. I feel like we could talk for hours more, but it will just give me an excuse to bring you back on, and you've been such a supporter of ours, so thank you for that.
well, thank you. I enjoyed it, and again, thanks for everything you're doing, and thanks for helping women realize that the world is out there, and you know, take a hold of it.
Yeah, well, it takes people like you. I feel like you can't be what you can't see, right? And so giving them positive role models like yourself really is changing the world.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you.